For 60 years, the members of the Star Trek cast kept a secret. Although they signed autographs and grinned at conventions, they secretly had a great deal of animosity against their leader. Crew workers left the set because William Shatner behaved so badly. Other actors' roles were eliminated by rewriting the scripts. His actions shattered friendships. In a shocking documentary, Shatner eventually came clean in 2025 at the age of 94. The cast avoided him for decades because of what he disclosed about how he treated them. You will be devastated by what he says. At 11:45 p.m. on March 22, 1931, William Shatner was born in Montreal's peaceful Notre-Dame-de-Grâce district. In a household with two sisters, Joy and Farah, he was the only boy. Additionally, the family bore the burden of both fresh aspirations and long-standing customs. In the early 1900s, his father, Joseph, left Austria and Hungary for Canada when he was just 17 years old. He had established a clothes manufacturing company by the 1930s that was robust enough to keep the Shatners safe during the Great Depression, when most families were struggling to make ends meet. Walking through his father's factory as a child, William observed the workers and the Montrealers, who lived in true riches. Two things were ingrained in him throughout those formative years: interest in business and a strong regard for diligence. The gentler side was introduced into the household by his mother, Anne Gomez. She was passionate about the arts and thought that creativity and discipline could coexist. William's perspective on the world was influenced by this combination of encouragement and strictness before he was mature enough to comprehend it. Being a qualified elocution teacher, an uncommon profession in the 1930s, Anne recognized something in her son before anybody else did. She enrolled him in children's acting classes when he was 8 years old, something that few Montreal families could have afforded at the time. By the time he was 10, he was performing as Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream on stage. He had studied Shakespeare's lines word for word and practiced them at home until his mother was happy. She put a lot of pressure on him, forcing him to repeat lines for hours, but it helped him develop the stage presence and voice that the world would eventually recognize. William frequently said that every brave decision he ever made was based on his mother's faith in him. Living in 2 languages from the time he could talk was part of his upbringing in Montreal. By the age of 5, he was proficient in both French and English, and he continued his education at Westmount High School, an English language school established in 1892. In the 1940s, only roughly 20% of its pupils were Jewish. William, however, never appeared to be intimidated. He immediately entered school plays, debating clubs, and public speaking competitions. His Shakespearean recitations earned him first prize in a provincial elocution competition when he was 14 years old. At Westmount, there was fierce competition, the kind of intellectual and creative strain that subtly boosts self-esteem. As a reminder of the talent that went through the same hallways, William later liked to point out that Leonard Cohen was also a student there. He began working at age 6, which was practically unheard of for a child in the 1930s. During the years prior to and during World War II, he worked as a voice actor for CBC radio dramas, giving weekly performances. His first part was in The Adventures of Billy Barker, which aired every Saturday night at 7:30 p.m. between 1937 and 1941. Even though he had to stand on wooden boxes to get to the microphone, he was still able to deliver his lines flawlessly. Before turning 13, he recorded almost 50 radio shows, according to CBC archives. Millions of people listened to these wartime broadcasts, which taught young William how to manipulate his voice, change his emotions, and capture the interest of strangers. His ancestry went back even further. Wolf Shatner, his grandfather, was born in 1857 in Eastern Europe, most likely in what is now Lithuania or Ukraine. Wolf altered the family name from Shatner to Shatner when he came to Canada in the early 1900s, which is a popular decision made by immigrants who wished to be accepted in their new nation. The new name had become part of their identity by the time William was born in 1931. Growing up, that shift had a subtle significance for him, serving as a reminder that occasionally reinvention was necessary to survive. Joseph, his father, never saw acting as a stable career. However, he also failed to stop his kid. In the late 1940s, he took William to CBC radio studios to wait while his son performed adventure stories, earning $3 per program. He received just that for voicing multiple parts in 1 hour in a 1948 CBC production. William subsequently claimed that such car rides with his father were among the first times he had the impression that his aspirations might come true. In other ways, Anne also aided in his development. William was always the lead in the small plays Mom put on at home. Although these family skits were impromptu, goofy, and heavily costumed, they taught him how to talk confidently in front of others. At the age of 12, he became a member of the Montreal Children's Theatre, which was established in 1933, with the goal of assisting young players in developing self-assurance and powerful speech. By 2021, the theater had presented more than 700 shows for over 250,000 kids, and William was a proud graduate. Long after he moved away, he was still affected by the laughter and stage lights from those performances. He discovered another space to develop when he approached adolescence. In the 1940s, he became a member of Habanim, a Jewish youth organization, and participated in dramatic readings of folk plays and Hebrew stories. He learned how words could unite people from such intimate yet impactful meetings, which were full of culture, pride, and storytelling. He realized later in life that these weren't only acts. They served as lessons in community and identity. In the summer of 1947, when he was 16, he was hired to direct puppet shows at a YMCA camp in Quebec. He made $25 a week, or almost $300 in today's currency. It was the first time he used his creativity to generate actual money. More significantly, he was compelled to give each character a unique voice for the puppet shows. The vocal technique that became well known years later in Star Trek was honed by that brief exercise. William decided to major in commerce when he arrived at McGill University in September 1949, because it seemed like a sensible choice, but he was always drawn to play. He became a member of the comedy group Red and White Review, which was well known for its incisive campus satire. Hundreds of professors and students were drawn to their sketches. William learned how timing might alter everything, and spent many evenings practicing jokes. He was quite confident of one thing by the time he graduated in 1952. Instead of working behind an office desk, his future lay on a stage. He played with the Royal Mount Theatre Company in the Laurentian Mountains during his summer vacation from McGill. Despite the small stage, heated air, and frequent collisions between the players, the 200-300 audience members enjoyed the performances. In Shakespeare's plays, he frequently portrayed humorous characters. He once unintentionally fell off the stage while playing Sir Andrew Agatchik in Twelfth Night after slipping on a banana peel. He remembered that moment as evidence that mistakes could become magic, and the audience shouted with delight. He accepted a position as assistant manager at the Vermont-based Mountain Playhouse after graduating. Even though the salary was insufficient to support his living expenses, he took in everything around him, preparing lines in the quiet hours and watching seasoned actors. Late into the night, he cleaned dressing rooms, sold tickets, scrubbed floors, and committed scripts to memory. Although it was a difficult beginning, it strengthened his fortitude. He entered the Canadian Repertory Theatre in Ottawa in 1952. He prepared himself for everything by understudying lead roles. The lead actor's illness just before a matinee performance was his big break. William received a standing ovation for his stirring monologue, despite having little any preparation before taking the platform. Critics saw him right away. That one performance demonstrated his ability to perform under duress and still win over an audience under the most trying circumstances. He raised his goals 2 years later. Inspired by Sir Tyrone Guthrie, he tried out for the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario in 1954. He received $150 a week from the festival, which employed him for the entire season. That would be roughly $1,600 when adjusted for today. It was sufficient to subsist, but not enough to live comfortably. He understudied parts in Oedipus Rex and Henry V, putting in long rehearsals, and learning how to perform Shakespeare for sold-out performances that cost up to $5, about $55 today. Although the job was demanding, the instruction was invaluable. When William Shatner arrived in New York in January 1956, he believed he was going to seize his future. Backstage at the Winter Garden Theater, for his Broadway debut in Tambourine the Great, he was 24 years old and anxious. The production was loud, large, and packed with newly imported British actors from Stratford. Shatner was given very little opportunity to speak. He portrayed Usam Kassain, a devoted disciple who attempted to avoid tripping while carrying Anthony Quayle, the main actor, in a sedan chair. The exhibition went on for 12 days, then it abruptly shut down. He was on Broadway one minute. The next, he stood in the chilly New York air, pondering how something that seemed so vast could disappear so quickly. It was both exhilarating and humble. However, it was plenty to establish him in the city and force him through the next open door. The Broadhurst Theatre opened that door in October 1958. Susie Wong's universe was intended to be a subdued drama, but instead it became a storm that altered Shatner's life. The primary actress, France Nguyen, acquired her lines by phonetic means and hardly spoke English. Robert Lomax, a young painter attempting to establish himself, was portrayed by Shatner. The show wasn't well received by early viewers. Despite the negative reviews, director Joshua Logan continued to work on it, changing lines, softening sequences, and directing the actors until something clicked. Broadway was buzzing about Shatner and Nguyen's chemistry. After the play gained popularity, Shatner gave 508 performances over the course of 15 months, ending in January 1960. No one viewed him as a sedan chair carrying background actor after that. All of a sudden, the city was at his feet and he was a budding Broadway sensation. He had begun his journey to that platform in Toronto years prior. He was on a small Canadian movie set for Butler's Night Off in 1951. He was given the part of a crook in a comedy that no one anticipated seeing twice, and they called him Bill Shatner. Half of the lines were made up on the fly, the crew kept recycling props, and the budget was extremely tight. Shatner's scene was brief, disorganized, and filled with the cast laughing at his attempts to be serious. In a few days the entire affair was filmed. It was his first appearance on screen, and it set the tone for all that came after, even though it was everything but glamorous. By 1958 he was in a totally different situation. He was chosen by MGM to play Alexei Karamazov in The Brothers Karamazov, which was filmed in Paris and London. It was his debut role in Hollywood. On the first day of shooting, he witnessed Ulla Brynner damage 2 vertebrae, worked 14-hour days, and practiced Russian accents. Despite the film's poor box office performance, Shatner's performance helped him break into the large studio film industry. Although it was a demanding profession with long hours, he learned how intense Hollywood could be from it. He stepped onto an even heavier set 3 years later. Shatner found himself in one of the most poignant courtroom dramas ever captured on camera, following Stanley Kramer's 1961 Nuremberg ruling. He acted opposite Spencer Tracy as Captain Harrison Byers. To get a 12-minute, cut-free verdict shot, they used many cameras to film sequences in the Nuremberg trial rooms. It was unforgettable because of the weight of the story and the intensity of the actual setting. One of the numerous reasons the movie is regarded as a landmark is Shatner's testimony in the courtroom. At that point, he was starting to become well known, and TV continued to call. He frightened viewers in the Twilight Zone episode Nightmare at 2,000 feet in October 1963. Inside MGM Studios, the crew constructed a life-size replica of an airplane and subjected it to wind and rain machines. Shatner portrayed a nervous traveler who thought there was a gremlin on the wing. To maintain the tension, he even tricked director Richard Donner by feigning to observe something during breaks. Shatner received $1,500 for the show, which cost about $75,000 to produce, and broadcast on October 11, 1963. It turned into one of the most well-known Twilight Zone episodes ever. He appeared as a guest star in the Project Strigus Affair, an episode of The Man from UNLE. A year later in 1964, Shatner raced through cramped hallways, while wires and harnesses were used to simulate zero gravity during filming at Universal Studios. Long before either guy realized they would be inextricably connected, Leonard Nimoy portrayed the villain's goons. The episode's enthusiasm was well received by viewers, and it continued to reappear in reruns, laying a subdued basis for what would follow. He made an appearance in The Star, an episode of Alfred Hitchcock's Presence, that same year. He portrayed an actor struggling to save his waning career, John Crane. Shatner spent hours practicing his speeches on the review studio lot, since the part was personal to him. The production was directed by Hitchcock, who shaped the mood and intensity. For the episode, Shatner received $1,200. Though it wasn't much, the performance was noteworthy and demonstrated his depth when the role called for it. In the episode Toach's Own Prison, which aired in May 1965, he became a cunning lawyer on Dr. Kildare. He walked hospital hallways with Richard Chamberlain for $1,000. The plot revolved around ethical conflicts and legal pressure, and Shatner's character drove the drama to its breaking point. It was an additional aspect of his expanding television career. He then rode into guns as a seasoned gunfighter in The Town That Wouldn't Perish on February 26, 1966. He rode across frontier sets at CBS Radford, employed the writing abilities he had acquired in Canada, and executed the most of his own stunts. Over $100,000 was spent on the show, which is a significant amount for a Western. Fans who remembered his pre-Star Trek work came to love his saloon shootout. Later that year, everything changed. No man had ever auditioned for the second Star Trek pilot until Shatner entered Gene Roddenberry's office. Shatner read a ship's log entry with such power that Roddenberry knew he had discovered his lead right away. Despite the fact that over 50 actors were vying for the part of Captain Kirk, Shatner even expressed to him his admiration for the Cage, the original pilot. And everyone in the room was amazed by his candor. Decades of science fiction history were shaped by that moment. In 1966, Shatner agreed to pay $5,000 per episode when the arrangement was finalized. He became one of the highest-paid actors in television as a result. He learned to remember 30-page scripts overnight after relocating from New York to Los Angeles. Initially, Leonard Nimoy was only making $12.50, which led to conflict. Shatner's compensation became the standard for future leads in sci-fi television, and his contract guaranteed him a $500 boost each season. In order to add more attractiveness to Kirk, Shatner made up flirting lines with the salt vampire creature during the table read for the first episode of the show, The Man Trap. The creature was portrayed by Sandra Gimple, and because of its eerie design, some actors avoided staring at it in between shots. Kirk's manner for the remainder of the series was shaped in part by that little moment of improvisation. Fan mail for Spock skyrocketed as Star Trek grew. Producers were pressured by Shatner to give Nimoy equal credit. Both performers featured together in promotional materials as the credits started to rotate. Ego wasn't the only factor. It demonstrated how the program was changing and how much the fans were influencing its direction. Shatner has to give it his all during filming bridge scenes. He occasionally oversaw activities throughout the set for 12 hours while seated in the captain's chair. A fight scene in the episode Arena had to go entirely off script due to a phaser malfunction. Before the director pressed cut, Shatner and the guest actor improvised wildly. These erratic moments contributed to the show's daring tone and kept the set lively. He returned to Kirk's history for Star Trek II in 1982, years later. With the same attitude that audiences adored, the show allowed them to explore stories too wild for live action. Star Trek was canceled in 1968. Supporters wouldn't let it go. NBC received an estimated 1.3 million letters. It grew to become one of the largest fan campaigns for television ever. The program was given a third-season renewal by NBC. In January 1968, Shatner took a plane to New York to personally thank fans. They established the standard for future fan movements and salvaged the program with their zeal. Following the 1969 finale, Shatner threw rap parties and shone behind-the-scenes videos, such as an early version of Turnabout Intruder, in which Kirk looks to be dying. Everyone was taken aback by the scene. It became a part of Star Trek legend, despite never having been broadcast. The original run came to an end, but the mythology that would accompany him for the rest of his life began. In 1966, when the members of the Star Trek ensemble were still getting to know one another, it all began softly. Only The Man Trap, the first episode, was being filmed. Michelle Nichols was pleased of her 15 lines when William Shatner made the decision that would stick with her for years because she was aware of how uncommon it was for a black woman to have a prominent role on television. However, Shatner took over and gave him several of her lines when the program got to post-production. Her 15 lines had been reduced to just 5 by the end of filming. The quiet around the situation made it even more difficult because no one had asked her beforehand or provided an explanation afterwards. Michelle subsequently discussed how actions like this gradually pushed minority actors to the side without anyone speaking up in the September 8, 1966, show. In 1967, the atmosphere on set did not improve. Leonard Nimoy used a basic bicycle to navigate the enormous studio, while Amok Time was being filmed. For 2 solid days, Shatner kept it a secret. In front of at least 20 crew members, Nimoy finally addressed Shatner after growing more irritated. Everyone could tell the stress was genuine since it was loud and direct. On September 15, 1967, Amok Time was broadcast, but the memory of that hoax lingered behind the scenes for much longer, strengthening a rivalry that would endure for years. During a 1967 photo shoot for a TV guide, another odd occurrence occurred around the same time. Finally, Nimoy was well known enough to receive a solo cover. It ought to have been a time of pride. Instead, Shatner insisted on being featured and blocked the solo segment, using a stipulation in his contract. Gene Roddenberry was enraged. He even labeled Shatner egotistical and selfish in a memo. The message became part of Star Trek history, after being circulated around the production office. What ought to have been a joyous occasion became just another illustration of the lengths Shatner would go to in order to preserve his own fame. The pattern persisted by 1968. George T. was expected to have a major moment while the Tholian Web was being filmed. In that episode, Sulu was supposed to be in charge of the Enterprise, but Shatner changed the script after reading it to prevent Sulu from receiving the command. After reshoots, T's intended 8 minutes of screen time was reduced to just 2. For T, it was just another instance of being abruptly shoved aside. Although the show was broadcast on November 15, 1968, the annoyance persisted for decades in memoirs and interviews. Lines and screen time did not end the conflict. Shatner went farther even back in 1966, with the episode The Enemy Within. James Doohan attempted to provide technical suggestions to make a pivotal sequence involving a transporter malfunction seem plausible. Shatner dismissed it all and proceeded with his own rendition. Doohan left the set in the middle of rehearsal because he was so unhappy. Everyone recalled the September 13, 1966 incident, which completely disrupted the day's plans. A number of staff personnel acknowledged years later that they shared the same sentiment, stating that Shatner frequently controlled situations and hindered collaboration. Although time passed, the stories continued to be told. While filming Star Trek Tatum, The Wrath of Khan in 1982, Shatner shocked everyone by performing a stunt himself. Without using a stunt double, he scaled a bridge and executed a 20-foot drop onto a platform. Even though it was just one take, he ended up stiff and bruised. The stunt, according to director Nicholas Meyer, gave Kirk's desperation more weight and gave the scene a more realistic sense. It contributed to making the movie one of the most dramatic parts of the whole series. Shatner took over as director of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, a few years later, in 1989. It was a challenging shoot. The cast was already fighting over the plot and the budget as the Mojave Desert approached 110. Nevertheless, Shatner made time for the scene with the campfire. The three actors sat around the fire singing "Row, row, row your boat," despite the fact that the treetops were incomplete and had to be concealed, using precise camera angles during the December 1988 studio shoot. Shatner subsequently claimed that the experience mirrored his own sentiments regarding family and attempting to mend broken relationships. The setting felt cozy and cohesive despite the turmoil behind the scenes. Shatner's career continued to take unexpected turns. He won 2 Emmys for his portrayal of Denny Crane on Boston Legal from 2004 to 2008. Denny's argument with a hallucination of himself on a park bench was one of the most well-known of the bizarre situations. As they observed Shatner's ability to combine humor and seriousness, writers began to give him more latitude. In addition to making the persona unforgettable, his bizarre dances, interactions with made-up characters, and brave improvisation revealed to fans a side of him unrelated to starships. He also introduced the Tech War novels in 1989. His original vision of a futuristic screenplay was rejected by studios, so he turned it into novels based on his outlines. In order to save money, the 1994 TV miniseries shortened the story's 200-year future setting to just 50 years. Tech War featured investigator Jake Cardigan as he tracked down users of tech, a digital narcotic that produced potent virtual worlds. Shatner remained close to the development and managed the adaptation. The series had a small but devoted fan base because of its detective noir and cyberpunk tone. He took on another unexpected responsibility during that time. Shatner narrated Rescue 911 from 1989 to 1996. He recounted more than 200 actual emergency stories during those 7 years. In 1992, the show peaked with an estimated 30 million viewers for an episode about a toddler who was choking. Some of the stories, such as the one about the 3-year-old who called 911 to save his mother in Van NY on October 10, 1989, included actual video. Millions of people were able to comprehend real emergencies thanks to Shatner's steady pace and soothing voice. In fact, the show helped popularize the 911 system throughout North America. His adventure continued to grow. He flew on Blue Origin's NS-18 mission on October 13, 2021, at the age of 90. At 10:49 a.m., the rocket took off. ET from West Texas. and just past the Kármán line, reaching an altitude of 3,407 to 160 feet. He experienced 3 minutes of weightlessness during the 10 minutes and 17 seconds of the journey. Shatner claimed that upon his return, the fragility of Earth overwhelmed him. Instead of the exhilaration that many had anticipated, he spoke of a sense of solidarity and profound melancholy. It was Blue Origin's second passenger flight, and a watershed in the history of private space travel. He was followed by controversy even in the digital era. Strong climate-related tweets surfaced on his Twitter account in November 2023. They caused disputes with renowned researchers and accused certain scientists of inflating the danger of wildfires. Subsequently, it was discovered that the posts were authored by an employee without Shatner's knowledge. Discussions over celebrity authenticity and the ease with which public voices might be misused online were sparked by the finding. "We are dying from climate change," Shatner remarked during his speech at COP28, demonstrating that his personal position differed from the ones that sparked the controversy. There were speculations of a health scare in September 2025. According to some, he was admitted to the hospital following an episode of low blood sugar. He dismissed it with a laugh when he made an appearance at Fan X in Salt Lake City, claiming that he had just overindulged in ice cream. Instead, he provided a new story and warned people not to believe AI-generated reports or tabloids. He talked about his recent journey to the South Pole with Neil deGrasse Tyson, which included shark swimming, unusual life beneath the ice, and other chilly hardships. The rumor became a narrative about how alive he still felt because of his vigor at 94. He co-hosted a virtual panel with Walter Koenig in 2024, a year prior. The two gave fans a moment of reconciliation and talked candidly about their past after years of separation. The mending felt genuine because of Koenig's presence, even though George Take did not go. They accepted past arguments, reminisced, and viewed the occasion as a positive step. As decades of conflict subsided into something more serene and straightforward, admirers from all around the world watched. Then, in a documentary released in 2025, Shatner finally revealed what many had been waiting to hear. He acknowledged that he was occasionally blinded by his ambition during the early Star Trek years. In response to the lengthy grievances from T and others, he stated, "I was driven to excel, but it created rifts I regret." He also discussed how he had previously placed a higher emphasis on Captain Kirk than on the sentiments of those around him. The documentary featured new interviews, vintage film, and Shatner's gradual evolution in understanding. His remarks provided fans and cast members with a unique feeling of closure following almost 60 years of tales and disputes. It demonstrated how a person with a reputation for being brash may also mature, think, and ultimately speak with humility.